The problem right now with organized medicine and the medical establishment, the way that everything is set up, the way that medical training is set up, is that doctors are followers, not leaders. And I have no doubt in my mind that this has got significantly worse over the last few years. This is a problem, if you want to study the history of medicine, that goes back a long way, but it's definitely deteriorated in our modern environment of doctor employees. The whole way that medical training exists from the very beginning is to create people who memorize things, who follow orders from up above, who don't ask questions, who lack critical thinking skills. And who do you think suffers in the end when doctors are unable to ask basic questions, when they fail in their duty to be independent critical thinkers? It is the patients. And I want to highlight this with two personal stories that perfectly illustrate how doctors are followers, they're not leaders, they're going to move in a mob-like direction. I call it the academic physician medical mob, and do things which are blatantly wrong and end up causing harm. So the first story I would like to share with you, I know a couple of you here already know this story, but it happened during my medical residency. How many remember that big push to have strict glycemic control in hospitalized patients? How many of you remember it here? Yeah? Okay. So for those of you who don't know, a few years ago, there was a study done, and it was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Of course, it was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, supposedly the world's premier medical journal. I would take issue with that historically, but let's stay focused here. The New England Journal of Medicine published an article, and it was on cardiac surgical ICU patients. And the study showed that if you have strict blood sugar control in diabetics, okay, under 120, these are, of course, United States units we're using. In Europe, it would be a different unit, but here in the US, under 120, then they showed some marginal benefit for these patients. What then happened was extraordinary, and this was a time that I was a medical intern. The medical establishment jumped on board like a mob. I call it Billy Bandwagon. They jumped on the bandwagon, strict blood sugar control. And I remember when I was an intern, there were these posters all over the floors. We must have blood sugar control between 80 and 110 in diabetic patients. So nurses were going around checking blood sugars, administering insulin to patients. And I remember my academic professors were all over this. There was a study in the New England Journal of Medicine that showed this result, so therefore we must do it. And I was an intern, and something didn't make sense to me. I mean, I'd just come actually from overseas, from the UK at the time. And not that the UK is that much better in this regard, but this was something that I just didn't understand because we weren't doing it in the UK. And I thought, why are we being so strict with blood sugar control? Isn't there a danger that we're making patients hypoglycemic? It just makes no sense that you would take this one study in a very select group of people and you extrapolate it to everybody. So I started asking questions, and I remember some of the colleagues around me at the time were saying, you're crazy, it makes sense, you should have strict blood sugar control. And I spoke about it with a few attendings, my program director, and they said to me, as they actually should, I actually really thought my program was quite good in this regard. They encouraged people to think outside the box a bit. And I was told, why don't you study this? So I actually did. I gathered data. It took a year and a half, 2 years. I was gathering loads of data, all the diabetic patients in our hospital with blood sugar control, what was their length of stay, and I was looking at specifically congestive heart failure. So I did this study, and then I found the result that actually patients with strict blood sugar control were doing worse when corrected for everything else. So I actually sent it away as a paper, ended up getting published in an endocrinology journal. And I actually made a poster, and we presented it. And this was in Maryland, where I did my residency. And our local rivals, Johns Hopkins, were at this event, and we all had to publish a poster. And the title of my poster was, Strict Blood Sugar Control, Have We Jumped on the Bandwagon Too Early? And I presented it, and it was at complete odds with what everyone else was thinking. And it actually ended up winning first prize, which was great. We actually beat Johns Hopkins, and I did this paper all myself. And I won the first prize, and then the paper got published, and lo and behold, within the next year or two, all these studies came out saying, what are we doing? You can't be so strict with blood sugar control. You're making patients hypoglycemic if you're that strict, and you're doing harm. And then the recommendation for strict blood sugar control went completely out of the window. It doesn't exist anymore. But that to me was just something which was so obvious. And I made the point when I presented this finding. I said, the human body has evolved over so much time to respond in a certain way to illness. We have blood pressure changes and our sugar goes up when our body's under stress. Why would you be so strict about suppressing that natural response? It didn't make sense to me. Ended up being completely correct. Think about how many people were harmed, and it was astonishing. All of these academic professors, there were posters in facilities. You must have strict blood sugar control. And it started with this one study in a select group of patients. How could the medical establishment do that? We're talking about top universities here. Complete lack of thought. Complete failure to critically think. And a complete desire to jump on the Billy bandwagon. That's the first story I'd like to share with you. The second one is a little bit more recent, and I know this will touch a few nerves in here. How many of you have some slight PTSD from the pandemic, right? A little bit, yeah? Of course, we all do, because the pandemic response was ludicrous in so many regards. But let me share with you this story that convinced me that there's almost no hope, if I can put it that way. It pains me to say that for the medical profession. So, of course, the pandemic happened, lockdowns happened. And then at the end of 2020, the shot came out. And there was this mainstream media headline. Safe by a certain percentage, effective by a certain percentage. We all remember that. And the mainstream media, interestingly, was also sponsored by the pharmaceutical companies, but forget that. And anyway, there was this huge euphoria. And I thought, hold on a minute. Why don't I read the study and understand the actual effectiveness of this shot? So the funny thing is, again, New England Journal of Medicine, there you go, published this study, and it's available online. Anyone can go to their website, and for a doctor, it would take 15 minutes to read. 15 minutes, that's it, to read an article. So I actually read it, and I wrote a blog article. I said, I've read this study, and I can tell you, firstly, it's not going to stop transmission, and the numbers needed to treat are really high. The absolute risk reduction is really small. To give this thing to millions of people to have a slight benefit, and what about potential harms? What about all the groups that are not tested? These to me seemed very logical questions. But I remember I was attacked at the time for writing this blog piece, which is still available. And people were saying, this is colleagues who were online and also around me. What is all this negativity? This is our way out. Like, what are you talking about? Do your job, read the study. But you seem to be obsessed with putting selfies of yourself online, saying the end hashtag at the bottom. How utterly ridiculous. You are supposed to be a doctor. Have you actually read the study like I have for 15 minutes? Overwhelmingly. 90% plus answer was no. I didn't read the study. I was like, well, it seems a bit strange that you're a doctor, you wouldn't read the study. So then, over the next few months, things panned out exactly as I expected. And I was kind of doing this test just for my own benefit, I shouldn't say amusement. And I kept asking at regular intervals, have you actually read the study 3 months later, 6 months later? Did you read the initial study? Why are you surprised that things didn't work out the way that you thought? And why didn't your hashtag work out? No, haven't read the study, haven't read the study, haven't read the study. Doctors of all specialties. And still to this day, I can guarantee you that over 90% of doctors have not even bothered to read the study and critically evaluate it for themselves. Think about this for a moment. Think about what this means. These are doctors. This is the biggest medical story of their life. The biggest one. And you're telling me you couldn't even be bothered to spend 15 minutes critically appraising the initial study. What exactly were you so euphoric about? The mainstream media headline? What you were seeing on your social media? You completely failed in a very basic thing. And that led me to almost think there's no hope. for the medical profession. If you can't even do that and realize that there were very obvious questions from the beginning, then what hope is there for the general public? You couldn't even go online and read the study. And I can pretty much guarantee you today, of all specialties, whether we're talking about medicine, surgical, overwhelming majority have not even bothered to do that. Because, as I started off saying, doctors are followers. They are not leaders. And I am sick. I am absolutely sick of all the excuses I hear. Oh, you know, our authority tells us this. Oh, fine. Your authority that's completely corrupted, that's bought and paid for, tells you to do something, and that's the end for you. You don't look at data yourself. This could apply to anything. Oh, I'm heavily in debt as a doctor. I can't rock the boat and ask questions. That's a pathetic excuse. I don't accept that for one moment. We have a pandemic of absolute ignorance within the medical profession. And I know you here are more along the lines of thinking like me. You see the lunacy of everything around us. But if doctors are not going to step up here and actually call out some of these ridiculous things that are happening and take charge and lead, then there's very little hope of truly improving healthcare. So I think that I'm happy to say the past is the past. We can't change what's happened before, but at least now doctors should stand up and they should start owning the situation, not being mindless, robotic protocol followers. Ask real questions. Seek answers. Isn't that what a true doctor and a true scientist is all about? Keep that in mind.